3, 2, 1.
Battle of the Decade.
Fight.
I must break you.
So for the Battle of the Decade in this episode and our main topic, we'll be fighting it out on which music genre was better, the 1980s hair metal or the 1990s grunge.
Round 1. Let's fight.
Choose your fighter.
So the music genre known as hair metal was more like a pop style version of metal or heavy metal, which started off in the early 80s, mostly out of Los Angeles. It was also known as glam metal due to the long, usually crimped out hair and guys wearing a lot of makeup, or guys in bands wearing a lot of makeup. Hair metal was like pop music due to its catchy riffs and hooks, and a lot of it was kind of just repetitive and had similar formulas for every song, and it was a lot more radio friendly. That got played a lot more on the radio at the time as opposed to heavy metal. Almost every hair metal band would release what is known today as the rock ballad on each album. Hair metal bands included such bands as Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Rat, Poison, Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, Skid Row, Warrant, Whitesnake, Wasp, Van Halen, Cinderella, Aerosmith, Dokken, Scorpions, and Guns N' Roses.
Grunge is a rock music genre and subculture that emerged during the mid-1980s in the Pacific Northwest U.S. state of Washington, particularly in Seattle and nearby towns. The word grunge is American slang for someone or something that is repugnant, and also for dirt. The first association of grunge was with the grinding, sludgy sound of Seattle rock music. Grunge was commercially successful in the early to mid-1990s due to releases such as Nirvana's Nevermind, Pearl Jam's 10, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, Alice in Chains' Dirt, and Stone Temple Pilots' Core.
Round 2. Let's fight.
Tail of the tape.
So hair metal had that look and catchy riffs and songs at that time that kind of everybody was into, and it was just, easy to sing along with and stuff like that. Just catchy tunes. It came in near the beginning of the music video popularity with MTV and Much Music, and was known for its fantastic live performances and concerts, which allowed for bands to showcase in their music videos at that time. A lot of the hair metal bands had singers that could really belt it out and were really good singers. Even some of them, I think, were like classically trained in opera and stuff like that. There's a lot of the, singers that could hit those high pitches and stuff, like Sebastian Bach from Skid Row, for example. I think he was trained in classical opera. A lot of the musicians were very talented and very good with their instruments, from bass guitar to drums to guitar players, and of course, again, the singing. It was so popular that a lot of hair metal is known as classic rock today. Concerts and again live shows were great, and an event with fantastic live music. It was just a show for a lot of these bands compared to, let's say, modern music or grunge in that essence. Like, they had the pyrotechnics and just really great bands that played live. Like, grunge is kind of basically was metal bands, and say some hair bands took off the makeup and
threw on a flannel.
Didn't get dressed up anymore. It's kind of like girls, that grew up a little and became moms and gave up. And their stage, a lot of them might have been okay live, but they just didn't have that whole show presence of pyrotechnics,
a spectacle,
lights.
Yeah.
So hair metal was great music, great musicians. They had a lot of great songs that came out of that genre, and I still listen to a lot of it today.
All right, and grunge music fuses elements of punk rock and heavy metal, featuring the distorted electric guitar sounds used in both genres, although some bands performed with more emphasis on one or the other. Like these genres, grunge typically uses electric guitar, bass guitar, drums, and vocals. Grunge also incorporates influences from indie rock bands such as Sonic Youth. The lyrics are typically angst-filled with introspective, often addressing themes such as social alienation, self-doubt, abuse, neglect, betrayal, social and emotional isolation, and psychological trauma and a desire for freedom. Some of the reasons why I appreciate grunge is because I feel like the lyrics are a little bit deeper. They're a little bit more introspective. I like the sound. I think Nirvana is probably one of the greatest rock bands of the 1990s. Kurt Cobain will definitely go down along the same vein as, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, people like this. He's obviously also in the 27 Club, one of those rock musicians who died tragically at the young age of 27. And I still listen to grunge to this day. I really like the sound, and I love the music.
Round 3. Let's fight.
Counterattack.
All right, and I enjoyed a lot of grunge, or the grunge genre too. Grunge was kind of like a slow fade in from the hair bands, and bands like Guns N' Roses eased into the 90s. I think Guns N' Roses is actually one of those bands that kind of was that transformation point from metal to grunge. Like Guns N' Roses are kind of considered a hair band, but by the end of that band's career, they still had the long hair and stuff, but they didn't wear the makeup and dress down a little more like what grunge became.
Mm-hmm.
Bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, or more specifically Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell, I thought were some of the best musicians of all time. Chris Cornell was one of the best singers of all time. I love Eddie Vedder. I'm not a huge Pearl Jam fan, but
you appreciate him as a solo artist?
Everything he does. Yeah.
Okay.
Grunge was good, but it was a bit too raw and unpolished. Concerts weren't as good, as I mentioned before. The musicians weren't as good. And there wasn't many bands to listen to in comparison to hair metal. Like, there were so many hair metal bands, even, shitty bands from that, but there were just so many to choose from, compared to grunge anyway. So the music, I don't think grunge music was as good as hair metal. The look wasn't as good, and definitely the live performances weren't that good. I've seen a lot of grunge bands. I've seen some live myself. They just weren't very good live.
Mm.
A lot of people love Nirvana, and like you said, you think, it's one of the best rock bands of all time. I don't think they're very good at all. And a lot of their live performances are pretty shitty. Like, the music sounds awful.
Mm-hmm.
The only band I really enjoyed live that was grunge was Alice in Chains.
Mm.
Hair metal, there were just so many good bands to choose from in comparison to grunge. I mean, grunge, I think there's less than 5 bands that I considered to be good. You can count all the really decent bands on one hand type thing. So hair metal was just better due to that.
Okay, and some of my thoughts on hair metal. I mean, sure, some of the bands played fast and with technical skills, but that was just guitar pyrotechnics, in my opinion. It lacked the soul and tried to replace it with flash. I thought it was a watered-down version of the 60s guitar heroes. I thought the songs were often about partying, sex, and drugs. I mean, that's cool, but doesn't really have a deep meaning that resonates with people after the song has ended. These dudes kind of dress like women for shock value. I don't think there's really, much substance to that. It wasn't really led by a youth finding their voice in an ever-changing world. I thought hair metal was kind of more of like a marketing ploy from the beginning, and just another example of corporate greed run amok in a mass market eager to eat up whatever they're fed. So those are some of my thoughts on hair metal.
Round 4. Let's fight.
Final round.
And lastly, and in this final round, the reasons why I think hair metal was better than grunge. Once again, hair metal had great singers and musicians and compared to the grunge era, even though Adam might not think that way based on what the last thing he just said. There were a lot more rememberable songs from the hair metal and the 80's genre. Again, much better live performances than the grunge bands that I saw anyway. Higher quantity of hair bands leading to a lot of kind of shitty bands, but also a lot more quality bands and choices compared to the 90's grunge. A much higher level of musicianship than grunge. Even though I enjoyed both genres of music, hair metal played a much bigger part in my life, and I enjoyed it a lot more. And that is why I think 80's hair metal is better than 90's grunge.
And some final notes on grunge. I'm going to say that grunge lyrics developed as part of a Generation X malaise that reflected that demographic's feelings of disillusionment and uselessness. I thought grunge songs about love were usually about failed, boring, doomed, or destructive relationships, so it had kind of a darker tone, but again, more introspective, a lot deeper in my opinion. I also like some hair metal. I'm going to say Guns N' Roses really sticks out for me, but I think some of the other bands you mentioned, a little too cheesy for me, and that's probably just my personal opinion. But those are some of the reasons why I thought 90s grunge is far better than 80s hair metal. Remember, you can vote on which genre of music you thought was better in the poll in the above top right corner here on YouTube, or on any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod, or at our website 10yearsapart.com.
And finally, on this episode of 10 Years Apart, we're going to look back at a 1980s clothing fad that was known as underoos. Could they make a comeback? Why did they fade away? It's time for Would That Fly Today? Did you like that clip? Well, if you did, remember to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. You can also find the full version of the podcast this clip was from on our YouTube channel, and more videos from 10 Years Apart. Comment below, tell us your ideas and stories from the 80s or 90s, and get more at 10yearsapart.com. Thanks again, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out.